Okay, so before we start, I'm going to ask these three wonderful people here to give a little intro of who they are and what they do. So maybe, Peter, if you can go first, please.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter. Many of you will know me as Mr. Money TV. Yeah, so I run a YouTube channel. Yeah, at the back of it, actually, we are a digital media company. Yeah, so the YouTube is just part of the brand. And yeah, that's about it about myself. And by the way, Mr. Money doesn't mean that I'm rich. Yeah? Please don't get it wrong. Yeah?
Okay, Walter, you next.
Hi, I'm Walter. Very familiar with Duimas. Thanks for having me over. Yeah, basically part of King's Group. So we're a group of companies that span really many industries, all the way from defense, medical, to properties, in countries like LA, Vietnam, Indonesia, and even Singapore. So we get to see a lot of cultural differences. So I hope to be able to bring some of that experience to this talk today. Yeah.
My name is Simplicio Michael Louise, but people call me M. Been in the fashion industry for over 25 years. Love working with Dwi, sharing entrepreneurial thoughts. Worked with many celebrities and corporations, ranging from Britney Spears, Black Eyed Peas, Ferrari, Mercedes, T-Mobile, creating their merchandising. And so the past 25 years has been nonstop branding, and so that's my expertise, fashion design and branding.
Okay, so the idea of this talk is branding your way to a successful global business. So Peter is still developing his business in the Malaysian marketplace, which is slightly expanding. Walter's already doing lots of work around Southeast Asia, and Emmy's on a global platform. So we have like an evolution of what's gone on here. So the key to see is what we do in a local marketplace applicable in an international or global marketplace? So maybe Peter, I'll start with you, okay? So maybe you can explain how you started off branding, because you are actually the brand. It's funny because when people say, oh, Mr. Money, that's that guy, right? So how do you start the branding? What happened?
So for those of you who actually watch my channel, you probably kind of know my story, right? So I started off as a insurance agent and unit trust agent, so financial sales in my life, yeah. When I transitioned into this, my whole idea was, I believe eventually things will be fully digitized, yeah. And I really wanted to build a financial product at that point, but too bad I did not know how to do any form of coding or even building a website. That's totally something that I do not know. And I thought to myself that, well, if I look at the market, even if you have a product, you're going to market yourself. So maybe since I can talk, might as well record myself and put it on YouTube, right? Yeah, let's see whether it works. And that kind of worked, very lucky. Yeah, and if you notice why I didn't use my own name, Peter, but when we started, I go with Mr. Money, was the idea that Peter will pass away one day. But if I can build the name Mr. Money into the idea and ideology of everyone can be a Mr. Money, then that's even better because it leaves a legacy and it becomes a brand. It's not just about me. Yeah, and so I think when you build a brand, definitely I'm not at that global side yet, but I have a firm belief that you start with the end in mind. You don't go starting a brand and say, like, hey, I'm just going to take one step at a time. I mean, actions one step at a time, but at the area of thought, you want to dream something very big and use that as your base. So let me just give you an example. My company name is actually called Finlit Media Tech Group Sdn Bhd. When we first registered the company, there's only 2 persons. And it's called Finlit Media Tech Group Sdn Bhd. And everyone else keep asking us, where's your tech? Where's your group? And isn't that a little bit too arrogant to register that name? And we're like, yeah, one day it's going to come. One day it's going to come. And today we have a number of brands under us, not just Mr. Money TV. And we are also venturing in building our own product as well. Yeah, so I believe that when you start thinking about brand, you start with an end in mind. Yeah.
So in actual fact, I think you are the brand, right? In many ways. So there's two things. There's either the product or the person or the service. You become the brand. Because I started watching your videos about 2 weeks ago, okay? I hadn't seen him. Who's this guy? And wow, this is so cool. So you are the brand, right? So you've also got to personalize the brand.
Yes. So I always believe that when a brand first starts, you need an attachment of personality. It's like in the early days of Apple, it's all about Steve Jobs. Then you may take an evolution of 5 years or 10 years, but eventually as a founder, you gotta grow out of it and let the brand take its turn to be matured, right? And just like any big brands, I think it all started with the same thing. Like AirAsia, it was Tony Fernandez. But eventually, after 10 years, people remember AirAsia, no more Tony Fernandez. So I think I'm in that stage in my brand where it's still me as the face, but what am I trying to build towards? And I truly hope is when people one day see me on the street, they don't remember Mr. Money, but rather it's just, hey, Peter, you're from Mr. Money TV. And true enough, like sometimes when I go out, people call me that. I'm actually way happier than someone calling me Mr. Money. Yeah.
It could be a good and a bad thing, okay? So I think, well, coming to you now, right? So Peter's mainly looking at the marketplace here in Malaysia. And you from Singapore now, I know you venture into many marketplaces. So when Peter's looking at his target audience in Malaysia, he's probably got a good idea. So when you approach different marketplaces in terms of, let's say, Southeast Asia, what's your strategy in terms of branding?
Yeah, so I was speaking to him earlier as well about this. So he wanted to bring his brand to Singapore. But at the same time, there are several difficulties whenever you cross borders. You're looking at legal, sometimes taxes. So stuff like that, I think it's important. You can overcome it definitely, but you have to work with strategic partners to speed up the process, to bring about a quick expansion to your business. So for example, let's just take Mr. Money for example, right? If you go into Singapore, you're going to have to look at things like the legal differences for banking there. So if you talk about products or you even talk about financial matters, there could be some licenses that you have to apply for the company itself. You might have to write into the monetary authority to seek permission. So stuff like that, right? When you cross borders, it is painful, but you just have to accept it. And also cultural differences. I mean, you take for example now we have a customer in Vietnam. Used to be a big insurance company. So someone came in, bought it, rebranded. But as they rebranded, the market in Vietnam changed because some of the social media KOLs were slamming insurance. It's a new market, it's a developing market, so they do not understand the products and they get, in a way, scammed by the insurance agents. So they talk bad about it and then the market just goes down. So besides the legals, you have even PR management. So stuff like that, right? It's a cultural difference. You don't get that in Malaysia, you don't get that in Singapore because you can't just go up on social media and start slamming a legit company, right? Yeah, but in Vietnam, that's a different case, yeah.
Different markets, different requirements, yeah? So one of the things when you go onto a bigger scale is brand consistency. So you've been doing branding now for, as an entrepreneur for many, many years now. So what's the importance or what's the issue around brand consistencies?
I think the biggest problem companies have with branding and quality control is that they don't fully understand the importance of branding. Branding can make or break the company, especially in today's market. And if you look at Facebook, if you look at Instagram, all of those pages and social media platforms, they're all the beginning of a thought process of making everyone a brand. So at the end of the day, each person here is a brand with their own. I mean, that's all Instagram and Facebook is a bunch of personalized images of what you like, what brands you like, what events, etc. And so, if the market was already noisy with a bunch of corporate brands, and then you have all the personal brands, then you have the influencers, then you have. So the market is even more saturated now and has more noise now. So your brand has to be even stronger now to stand out. And most companies don't understand that. The bigger corporations, KFC, Taco Bell, McDonald's, they all understand it and they invest money, which is why you've seen the changes in their logos even in the last 2 decades. They're simpler, they're more for the digital era. And so I think to keep consistency, you first have to understand that it's so important to know your brand and to know where your positioning is. And then maintaining it is another challenge.
So how important is it to have an emotional connection to a brand?
Brands are always personal. You mentioned your brand and you mentioned Tony with AirAsia. And brands are always the extension of the person, the business person or the artist, whatever. It starts with you, which is why whenever I do logos and branding workshops, it's always an internal search within yourself about what your values are, what your goals are, what problem in the market you want to solve. And then you have to translate all of those attributes, characteristics, beliefs, ethics, and translate it into a product. And then you have to translate it into how you sell that product, how you market that product. And that's what people forget is that when people think of branding, they think it's a logo. But branding is everything from the words on how you articulate the product when you're describing it to your consumer, from how you sign your email when you're sending an email, what email account is it coming from, how you dress when you're presenting, which is why it's funny because when people think fashion design, you know, they think someone using markers and sewing all day. But fashion design is a business. And I've designed many companies over the years, and I've designed for many companies over the years. And these are high-end corporations like BMW and Puma. And each one, whenever I designed for them, always gave me a minimum 100-page CI manual on what not to do with their logo. So if it's a logo on the back of the neck, it can only be 2 inches and half an inch down from the t-shirt, and it can only be white if it's a navy background. And then they give you this manual, and then they say, have fun in design, right? But those are the challenges that I get weekly, and the fact that I design my own collection and for many other people helped me to really understand branding, you know? And branding is what's gonna make or break your business because it tells the consumer exactly who you are, so the consumer can decide, do I love you or not? And if I love you, I'll more than likely love everything that you're selling. Then you get a loyal customer.
I think one issue, or one point I'd like to mention on that is in terms of brand consistency, right? I used to in the past work in manufacturing. I worked for a big German company. And we opened a factory in Shenzhen in China. And we had a certain sort of blue color that was a requirement for the factory on the internal walls. And we painted the walls 8 times because it wasn't the right Pantone of blue. And I thought, this is just a waste of money. But the principle was, wherever you walk in the world into one of our factories, you see the same color. So it's the subconscious consistency, right?
You experience the same thing. And people always forget terms and words and verbiage, but people never forget experiences. If you make someone feel happy, they don't forget you. If you make someone feel sad, they don't forget you. If you give someone an experience by giving them a top quality product or a t-shirt, they also don't forget you. And they want to experience that again and again, which is how you get your customer. And back to my point about being a fashion designer, if you think about it, fashion design is like I do a 60-piece collection for men and women, 3 colorways each. With the red colorway, I know that the buttons are blue. With the white colorway, I know that the buttons are red. The top stitching on the buttons, the stitching to hold the button in, the color of that is silver, like to the T. And then when we do fashion shows, we know that this look has this color nail polish, has this hairstyle. It's all branding. You know what I mean? It's all branding. So if you think about all of those details with your company, it's going to help you communicate what your company is. So it doesn't mean the consumer will like you because there's something for everything, for everyone. But at least it gives you a chance of getting a loyal customer, because the biggest problem with lack of sales is confusion. When your consumer doesn't know what you represent, doesn't understand what you're about, then they have to think too much. And if you don't catch them in the first 2 minutes, then you lost the consumer. So the more accurate you are in your branding, the more chances you have to get a new customer and a new.
So, well, in terms of what Em was saying then, how do you deal with those things when you're going across borders? Because as you said, different cultures have different ideas, maybe different beliefs, certain things. How do you ensure consistency of branding when you're trying to cross a border?
Yeah, so I think a good example could be simple things like colors, understanding what each color means in a country. Like in Malaysia, the tendency is not to use red, because red is very aggressive. You see a lot of green. Some can attribute that to, because that's a very big Muslim population and all that. As much as we try to be racially right and equal, but each country is different. So a very good example is Grab. When Grab was in Singapore or most countries, you would see green, right? Green helmets, green this, green that. But when they moved into Vietnam, they did quite a big move by changing the color scheme to red. I was quite taken aback because that's like totally different. But then you sit down and you realize, okay, because Vietnam, the flag's red and yellow, right? And red is very much who they are in terms of a socialist country. So that is very close to their heart. So things like that, that's not only just legal, but very cultural as well. But then again, the legal part sits in when you go, okay, so in terms of trademark, how does that cross the border, or how does that not hold water in another country? So that's where we go deeper into IP, where we go advise customers to say, hey, if you want us to do your trademark, besides doing your color scheme, let's trademark a black and white scheme as well. So that gives you coverage across the board. Yeah, so this is what we also advise the customers. Yeah.
So, Peter, back to you. So one of the big things with branding is storytelling, right? And I think indirectly you're telling a story all the time when you're doing a presentation, right? So are you doing that consciously to get people to, because you want them to believe what you're saying, and you can be trusted. So how are you building a trust in you as the brand?
I think when it comes to trust and storytelling, I think these two are very close to each other. I think ultimately, you're always telling a story wherever you go. It's just that whether you're telling a good story that people are listening to, or is it a bad story, right? Yeah, and we all know how bad story turns out to be. And the only way that you can get people's trust is when you can tell a story well. Yeah, and you can engage with people's emotion, then there's more likely that people will trust you. And the truth is, I think especially in this modern world today, as we are coming to where we are, I think there needs to be a shift in the way we understand story. I think in the past, especially like maybe 5-10 years ago, the kind of story that's told by corporate and brands tends to be much more sanitized, tends to be much more safe, right? But today, the kind of story that needs to go out has to be much more vulnerable. This is one thing I do notice, especially if you're a smaller brand. If you're a big brand, it's still fine because people have that idea like, where are you coming from? But if you're smaller and if you're starting out, I think it's very important that you tell a vulnerable not as in you expose your weakness, vulnerable as in be honest about your emotions behind. Like So in my company, there's 3 partners, right? There's me, there's an operation guy, there's another guy called Frankie. Some of you may have watched his video before. And he's an investment banker. So for him, emotion is something that they don't talk about, right? So like the other day we asked him, what's your biggest regrets in life? And this is what he said. Regrets? There's no such thing as regret. It's all the decisions you made, you just go through with it. So we always call him the Buddha in the office, because no more emotion, right? Yeah, and that's why I'm the guy that deals with people. Because, like for example, when we talk about even in management, right? To get your first brand, in fact, is to get your team to trust you, right? And I always tell my team this thing: when you come and work for us, okay, this is not so inspiring side, but what we always tell them is when you come and work for us, we are actually a platform. We always believe that we are a company that helps you to achieve where you want to be, to give you the best opportunity. But the inspiration has to come from you. The motivation has to come from you. I'm not the motivator. Yeah, you have to make that decision yourself, right? And it is such ways of telling a story. And for example, even my own story, like why am I doing what I do? It's because I did very well over the years as an insurance agent and unit trust agent. I could have just stayed there and enjoyed my life. But I recall that when I was young, I actually wanted to go into NGO. Yeah, I wanted to really help people, but thanks to wanting to get a family and understanding that you can't live with a very meager salary, yeah. So, and I'm also a little bit more greedy. I decided to venture out to do what I did. But over the years, after achieving those things, I wasn't very happy, right? And I decided to take the leap to do what I do. And sometimes, like just by telling this story, sometimes for most people, they are a little bit afraid to tell their true emotions, because it feels like, what has that got to do with you? Why do I want to expose this to people, right? But the truth is, as in this world where things are getting more and more digitized, people actually truly yearn for real emotional connection and honesty. Like even with my audience, I tell them upfront, right? Like sometimes when we run classes, we get banks to sponsor those classes, but we'll still charge a fee of 20 or 100 ringgit. And I tell them upfront when they come to my class, I say, look, I'm not here doing this video because I'm some rich guy who have achieved my dream and today I'm here to help you. I could have just sit at home. No, I need to pay for my stuff. And if I organize an event, you guys do not appear, it's going to make me look bad for the brands and you're wasting my time. So I'm going to charge you because I need to make a living. If you don't like that, you can walk off. And yeah, some people like it, some people don't like it. But the truth with a successful brand is it creates that strong emotion. And you either like it or don't like it. That's all. You can't stand in between and say, I'm going to be that brand that's so sanitized that everyone looks at it and go, yeah, I approve. But you know what? When you are that brand, you are the brand that people forget. Right?
I think, I think brand values are very important, right? And you mentioned being vulnerable. I think, because that creates emotional connection, right? Because people can empathize with you, so they can relate to you, so that's going to pull them in more. But I think the challenge, or maybe we should discuss the challenge now, is what's going to happen now as we move more and more into our future world of AI in terms of branding? Because I know who you are, right? I can see you on TV, but maybe I see another picture of you, which isn't you, looks just like you, says the same things as you. How do I know it's you? So I think branding going forward will have some real challenges. So how do we overcome this challenge of, is that a real brand or not a real brand? Or is it a copy of that brand? I mean, how do we look at those things in the future?
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned this because recently we set up a company that deals with InsurTech. So it's like insurance but using technology. In this group, it encompasses cyber insurance as well, cyber identity insurance. So we realized that with the younger generation, everyone has a cyber identity. I mean, even these days, you and me, right? before, maybe 10 years back, I was pretty resistant to social media and all that, but then I can't catch up with my kids and they don't want to go out with me. So then now I'm on Instagram, but but
Very cool.
yeah, but yeah, pretty cool. But I see instances on a daily basis of identities being stolen, being adulterated, being used for things like scams. So that brings about another whole angle of how AI can destroy a business as well. So going back to your question, I think moving forward, AI has to be very well governed, although it's kind of like machine learning, but this machine learning has to have really clear limitations. If not, we are moving into areas that we do not understand, and we're moving too quick. Yeah, that's from our standpoint. But definitely from a marketing standpoint, from a branding, sales standpoint, it does wonders, in the markets, yeah, at a low cost.
In terms of capturing data and being more targeted towards, But there's always going to be upsides and downsides to that. People use it in the wrong sort of way. So, Em, I mean, what about...
I wanted to add a little bit on what he was saying. Authenticity is key. So when you're talking about being vulnerable and being honest, I think if you're authentic with yourself and with your brand, people will feel it. And it's just like with fashion. When I design something imbalanced, which is not often, and the consumer doesn't like it, they're not the professional, so they cannot articulate why they don't like it. I know that I used the wrong fabric, it's a bit too long, too much red, it's imbalanced. The principles of color and art, it's imbalanced. They don't know that, but they just know they don't like it. So same thing with your product. If you're inauthentic, all they know is there's something funny about this product. There's something funny about this guy that I don't like. And that's it. And you lost the customer. So no matter how much you talk and how much you do your sales pitch and how hard you go, they just won't buy it. So again, it just goes back to being authentic, which is what you touched on. I think that's key.
Okay. I think one of the things that is going to change branding is technology. You use technology to build your brand, basically, okay, over the last 4 years, and that's why people recognize. Maybe 20 years ago, you'd have to drive around everywhere so they could see you, but now you can stay where you are, and they can recognize you. So that's a different way of branding, right? But as you said before, because you are the brand, you also, when you're outside of that brand persona, still the brand. So people might, if you behave in a certain way, like it damage your brand badly, right? So how do you deal with those situations when you are the brand?
I think you just have to be extra careful. Yeah. I think number one, be authentic. Yeah. Because when you're authentic, you don't have to lie. Yeah. I think I've met other YouTubers and so on. Definitely, the circle is not that big, right? It is the worst when you try to behave a certain way in front of camera and you're not the other way around. Yeah. So I always tell my partners and my wife this. It's not that I'm a very honest guy. I'm just not very good at lying. So I don't want to be caught. So I'll just be myself. Yeah. So I weigh my pros and cons. It's not because I'm honest. I'm just not good at lying. That's all. So I'd rather be myself and live my life as it is, right? Now, definitely living a life as it is doesn't mean that you walk out the street, you do something stupid, right? Yeah, then you're going to be also responsible. Like, I'll be honest, there are certain places that I don't go anymore. There are certain, I try to avoid going out too much as well sometimes. Yeah. But if I do go out, I go out. I don't really care. But yeah, sometimes you'll be still wondering, like, you want to uphold a certain standard. But I'll just convince myself to a certain extent that just don't do anything stupid. Like, you don't go and take drugs, right? Yeah. You don't... I still go to a pub. I still drink with my friends. And just don't get drunk, right? Yeah, because you are somewhat public figure, then just don't get drunk. Like, as long as don't be stupid, but live a life as it is. Oh, sorry if it's a bad word, right? Yeah.
But I I want to touch on that. It's just being authentic. Because if you're authentic and you communicate it well, people know what you represent. So if there's people on the web complaining about how you act, the people that know your brand say, what did you expect? So there's no right or wrong to that other than not being authentic. And if you keep changing your position because you want to please a certain demographic, then you'll never have a position, which will confuse the customer even more, which is what comes down to marketing anyway. It's about knowing your demographic and psychographic. If you know that, you don't need to concern yourself with the rest of the world. It's your audience, your market, your consumer. You can't please everyone.
And when you look at branding, and this is about global branding as well, right? So some brands can cross borders, some brands can expand. So probably because you are the brand, it'd be hard for you to say business, I guess business in the US, for instance, right? Because your marketplace is here right now. So what sort of brands are the brands that can actually go across borders more successfully than other brands? In this case, Peter is the brand, right? But in other areas, what brands have the most chance of being successful in crossing borders? Is there a certain sort of brand, certain sort of sector?
Yeah, I think the easiest to cross borders are the consumer goods. if you things like food, things that are apolitical, those are the easiest to cross borders. If it's a person or a brand related to just a person, could be pretty difficult because then like even Asians or Caucasian has a different meaning in a different country, right? Yeah, so I think just consumer products, rice, milk, those are pretty easy to cross borders as a product. Like Coca-Cola, right? It's everywhere, but even Coca-Cola has problems in certain countries with Pepsi.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah, it is.
And I think it's just about, again, knowing your market, because a couple of decades ago, what happened with globalization is all the monsters, all the big machines broke. All the systems broke. The fashion industry changed, the music industry changed, finance changed, everything broke. And so everything got disintegrated into smaller markets. So it's just like how you used to have jobs before. You could have one job, make 300,000 a year, work there the rest of your life, collect money, die, your family gets the money. Now it's different. People change jobs all the time. Jobs don't last. Companies don't keep you for 50 years. So every system is just different. So it's the same thing with your audience and your sales. You don't get everything from one country, from one demographic or anything anymore. It's bits and pieces. You can get the same amount, just like you can get the same salary of 300,000, but now you got to take it from different pots, different countries, and within each country, different niche markets. So if you focus on your authenticity, you focus on your communication for the product, you will reach the people that want to buy your product as a total, and you will still get the same revenue that you would have gotten in the past. Because that's all it is, because the world, all technology does is disrupt everything. And all we are now is technology. So you have to change your ways based on what technology is being used by the masses. And the youth now are born with technology. And there's a good and bad to that. They're born with the internet connected to their veins, so they know everything. The problem is they have no experience, so they don't know anything. So they're getting all this information, but they don't know what's bad, what's good, what do they like, what they don't like, because they haven't had time to try anything or live, which is good for us as brands so that we can guide them as to what's good, which is obviously our products.
The flip side of that, of course, is all the bad brands that are out there. I think one of the things I was going to ask you actually is that, because you've been in the entertainment branding industry for many, many years, right? You often see artists rebranding themselves, right?
I wanted to touch on that too, because again, brands is not just like a car. People are brands. When you hear Britney Spears, when you hear Dua Lipa, when you hear Rihanna, you know the sound, you know the look, you know the tempo. It's because they branded her so well. Those big agencies and corporations branded her so well that anything that she does will sell, because the person who loved her for the first song will love her for the second song because it's a similar vibe, similar energy, similar look. So brands also are people, which is what I touched on at the Instagram and Facebook point. We are all brands. And in fact, when you're applying for jobs, they look at you as a brand. They Google you, they see what's on the internet, they see what you stand for. You are a brand. So the more everyone thinks of themselves as a brand, the better off you are. And again, the kids are connected to the internet, so they understand all this, which is why when we do branding workshops, we can teach kids as young as 7 years old, and they get it. They get it. Which is why it's important that there's schools like Dewey, because the kids are ready. The adults are not, actually. The kids are ready. So we have to build more systems and rebuild this new machine, this new monster, so that we can process all the creativity and harness all the creativity that the kids have, because they have it, but they need guidance.
Can I add on something? I was on that point of rebranding, right? I thought if you guys really want to check it out, I thought Taylor Swift is a fantastic person when it comes to that. Just look at her career growth from a country music to her latest album. There's one thing that I pointed out to a lot of my, or all of my staff is this. Listen to her latest album. For the first time ever, you'll hear an album where all the songs sound like one song. You don't even know you completed the album.
So you love the whole album?
Yes. And you just replay it automatically. It is very abnormal for any artist to do that, because usually you have varieties of style of song with one album. But for the first time ever, you'll hear an album that everything is the same. And with a mixture of her kind of lyrics, which is Bad Blood kind of lyrics and so on, but it's a masterpiece of branding. And she's not afraid to change that forward. She did not retain herself and say, I'm still that country music girl. She evolves. And she follows the trend, and she built a whole new category for herself. And that's why her fan base
But
keeps
speaking
growing.
on branding on an artist, her signature is the red lipstick
Yeah.
and the long blonde hair. Like it's said, even Pink, the artist from before, had to keep her hair pink until a couple of years when she kind of relaxed. But she had to keep it pink because her name was Pink. Because it takes time for the world to understand your message. You could say something 10 times and people are like, duh. And on the 9th time, oh, you're pink. Your hair is pink. Like it actually takes that long. It doesn't take as long now because of globalization and technology, but it takes time.
But I think brands like that are in the entertainment sphere have got to be relevant all the time, right? And they're usually at the front edge of what's going on, so they're looking at trends all the time to see what's happening, and they're rebranding themselves. Right?
And that's another point with cultural differences, because I used to manage artists, and in LA, it's all different markets. LA wants the newest thing, and then when you get to a certain age and a certain look, they want to kick you out. They'll find the scandal, they'll talk about the scandal, and then you go down. Other markets, Mexico, even Malaysia, Romania, are loyal. So it doesn't matter how old the song is. You come here and the song is good, they'll pay for a concert. So it depends on the market, the cultural differences, the demographics. So it's all different.
So I think that's why it's also difficult sometimes for local artists, should we say, to become more of an international artist, right? Because they haven't got that. I mean, these big guys have these massive machines.
So that's another point. There are certain markets that are good springboards for brands. I used to live in Germany designing for Ferrari and Puma and Michael Schumacher, Ralph, all that. And they had a company there called Kimsey, which is a clothing line of outerwear based on the lake called Kimsey. It's so silly and specific to where I lived in Bavaria next to Austria, but it's a $500 million company. But does anyone around the world care about Kimsey gear? No. Yet, two ladies make a warm-up suit for women, put the word juicy on the butt, give it to Cameron Diaz, and it's a hit. And it's still selling today, and it's still selling licenses. So there's something, to your question, there's something about different markets like Dubai, New York, LA, where if you springboard off that, it becomes an international brand because of how they market their city. But you can have a multi-million-dollar company elsewhere, and it doesn't become international. So again, it depends on your goals. If you want to be an international brand, you make sure you're in that market.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I think if you combine both of the angles, there are platforms now in the market, global market, that assist smaller businesses to reach out, like TikTok, Alibaba, Amazon. You know, you go on to the music industry, Spotify, because a lot of these brands are actually losing their ability to make money. For example, a singer, we used to sell disc, right, CDs, and then it moves on, and then you realize that everything is digital, but then you could get it off this little website, that little website, and they lose income. So then comes along these platforms that enable them, and they do it pretty globally. So I think the moves by these companies are pretty good because they take on the legals, they take on everything in the different countries, and do not build on that cost to the business itself. So if we could move forward with such bigger companies coming along to help the smaller ones, I think it's a pretty good sign. Yeah.
Also, I want to touch again on the artist thing because anyone can be an artist. And the cool thing about being an artist and branding yourself well is that they cannot get anyone else. They'll always need you. So you'll always have a job, which is why no one can replace Britney. Britney's Britney. Dua Lipa's Dua Lipa. So you have to be authentic and brand yourself so well that if someone wants that one thing, they can only get it from you.
I think all those sort of things you mentioned, right, about the different countries that when they can be a stepping stone to another area, even with the advent of social media and these things, there's still a cultural layer that has to be there to make it work, right? And it's a little bit like let's say ACE. Right? If I use ACE as an example, what we do here in the school is different to anybody else probably in Malaysia or even in most parts of the world. But if we say we're an innovative entrepreneur school from Malaysia, people think, Malaysia? They're not known for that. So it's always an uphill battle. So there's still subconsciously with people's minds, right? People will still stereotype things, right? So it's being able to break that stereotype as a brand and break through into new marketplaces, which is really important. So what's the best thing for a brand to break through in those sort of stereotype situations?
I think it's just repetition because it takes time for people to understand, one. Two, you have to choose the platform that reaches your demographic. It doesn't mean if TikTok's popular, you use TikTok. Maybe that's not your audience. You know, I know Facebook is a bit leans towards the older age range, and if that's your audience, you use that. So it's not a particular platform. It's really, again, about knowing yourself, knowing your product, and that will affect all of your decisions on how you market, how you sell, how you present, how you position.
So being authentic and being consistent, right?
Knowing yourself,
Knowing yourself.
knowing your product, and sticking to it.
Yeah. Well, you got any more comments on that one?
Yeah, I mean, to make it a bit more candid, right? You look at the politicians, the more prominent ones that you would remember, just take simple Trump and Biden, right? They all have very particular traits that everybody would remember, standing there, tripping over, falling down, and then some guy, really,
Trump's hair.
Yeah. So yeah, things like that they may have negative connotations, but actually at the back end, if you look at the campaigning, that may be deliberate for people to remember you. And then they come in with that one particular punchline when it's needed to make a difference. So things like that could be branding, consistency.
Yeah, part of Trump is not only the hair, but shock value. So he has branded himself over time, and you know what to expect from him.
So on that high of Trump, we'll end because that's the end of the presentation, right? So I think like it's important to when you're trying to do a global brand, obviously there's many things to take into consideration, but I think it's becoming more and more of an issue now to be authentic and to be real, given all the things that happen in today's world, right? So guys, thank you very much for taking the time to do this, and thank you again, and good luck in the future with your brands.
Thank you.